Our top story this hour, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un plans to travel to Russia this month to meet President Vladimir Putin to do a deal to supply Moscow with military hardware. The possible meeting comes after the White House said it had new information that arms negotiations between the two countries were actively advancing. Both Putin and Kim have already pledged closer cooperation. Well, Arise News chief correspondent John Cookson has this story.
Pyongyang on the 28th of last month at a parade where North Korea once again showed off its vast array of weapons. Watching from a balcony on the left of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Russia's defense minister Shoigu. He was on a shopping trip for military hardware. With the war in Ukraine into its 19th month, Russia needs to replenish its depleted stock of conventional weapons, and North Korea is happy to sell whatever Moscow needs. But what's worrying America and her allies in the Far East like South Korea and Japan, seen here holding recent joint military exercises, is what North Korea will get in return for supplying Russia with weapons. Much needed currency for sure and food stocks, but also possible new naval weaponry and advanced nuclear technology, enough to cause the Allies a lot of concern. Kim last met Putin in Vladivostok in May 2019. For the next meeting in the Russian port city, the North Korean leader will travel 1,000 kilometers in his own personal armored train. Mr. Kim hates flying. John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins us live from London for more on this. John, great to have you on Newsday. What does Putin want from Kim in the way of weaponry?
Great to be with you, ladies. Well, the North Korean military is the fourth biggest in the world. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force there combined about 1.2 million personnel. Kim Jong-un has thought to have between 100 and 200 nuclear weapons and long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, including the Hwasong-18, which has a range, I'm just checking there, of 15,000 kilometers. But Russia doesn't want any of this because it's got these kind of weapons already. What Russia really needs is artillery and shells to fire, because in this long-running war with Ukraine, the Russians are firing, as the Ukrainians are, thousands of rockets almost every day, and quite frankly, the Russian military is starting to run low on stock. So Shoigu has been on a shopping trip to North Korea to try to restock. He's also visited Tehran in a bid to get the Russian military back up to speed. But it's artillery that he wants, and North Korea has a plentiful supply along with rockets, and it looks very much that North Korea will supply Russia if this deal goes through. Now, it's expected that Kim will travel in 5 days' time to Vladivostok on the east coast of Russia for a meeting with Putin. They've met before. They get on reasonably well together, and this, of course, is a real worry to the West and the allies in the Far East.
This is a really interesting development, John, but can you tell us why the US and her allies in the Far East are so worried about an arms deal between Moscow and Pyongyang?
They were worried already because of tensions in the Far East, because of China's expansion, both economically, politically, and militarily in the Pacific. So with North Korea on side already with China as an ally, this kind of triumvirate that seems to be forming between China, North Korea, and Russia really bolsters that force, which is could, in practical terms, turn the Far East into something very unpleasant for the Allies. And the Allies, of course, were including South Korea, the Philippines, Japan, countries like that, and Australia too. So it's this alliance that's strengthening between China, North Korea, and Russia, which is the big concern of governments in the West.
Well, John, what practically can Washington actually do, to stop any deal?
Well, in theory, they can add sanctions to North Korea's already burdened down with sanctions. It's sanctioned up to the hilt already with American and UN sanctions. And when China intimated that it might supply weapons to Russia, then America quickly said that it would impose sanctions against China if it did. Sanctions against North Korea, yes, they could be further imposed if this deal goes through. But frankly, North Korea is getting by quite nicely. That's the government, not the people. People are suffering terribly. The leadership will survive all sorts of sanctions because they have this ally in Beijing, and there are all sorts of ways in that part of the world of getting food and military supplies if needed. So sanctions could be imposed if this deal goes through, but they would have minimal impact on the leadership in North Korea.
All right, then, John, let's talk about this trip or that Kim would be taking, someone who rarely leaves the capital of and is expected to travel to Russia's Pacific coast by armored train. This, of course, coming in from military intelligence. Do we have any more details about this and how this in itself will confirm this exchange between Putin and Kim?
This story is all coming out of Washington. It's not being confirmed by Moscow or Pyongyang at the moment. But when America puts out this kind of detail, you can be fairly certain that this is actually going to happen. You're right. He doesn't leave. Kim Jong-un doesn't leave North Korea very often. In fact, for Arise News, been with him twice. When he left North Korea, went to Hanoi, Vietnam, and also Singapore for a summit with Trump. And there is utmost secrecy surrounding his visit. And I keep reading reports that he's terrified about security. But when I was with him in Hanoi, to everyone's surprise, he went off to a shopping mall almost on his own with minimal security, and he was greeted like a rock star by the locals, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. So I'm not sure that these big concerns about security surrounding him and his personal views are absolutely true, because he does go out and about sometimes. But that said, he will travel in an armoured train, but he's been travelling in this train, which used to be owned by his father, since time began, and it comes as no surprise that he's not flying but going by armoured train.
No surprise indeed. But thank you so much for joining us here on Newsday. Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson. We appreciate your time and insight as always.